Now on BBC One at 10 o'clock, the BBC News with Hugh Edwards.
Tonight at 10, one of the UK's closest allies, the ruler of Dubai, is accused of holding his daughter in solitary confinement after she tried to flee. The BBC obtains video recordings in which Princess Latifa claims she's being held against her will and says she's concerned for her own safety.
I'm a hostage and this villa has been converted into a jail. All the windows are barred shut. I can't open any window.
Her father, Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid, who's an important friend to Britain, insists his daughter is safe in the care of the family. But last year, the High Court in London found that the Sheikh had ordered his daughter's abduction. We'll be looking at the diplomatic challenge posed by the latest allegations. Also tonight, an extra 1.7 million people in England are to be told to shield and to be put on a priority list for vaccination. Children aged between 6 and 17 have started taking part in trials for the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. In Myanmar, more protests against the military coup as the ousted leader Aung San Suu Kyi faces new charges.
May have been sport on BBC News.
Good evening. The BBC has obtained secret recordings made by the daughter of the ruler of Dubai, in which she accuses her father of holding her in solitary confinement. Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid is a close ally of the United Kingdom with extensive business interests here, and he claims that Princess Latifa is safe in the care of the family. It's known that the princess tried to leave Dubai back in 2018, but was captured by troops and forced to return. And last year, the High Court in London found that Sheikh Mohammed had ordered and orchestrated the abduction. Our correspondent, Nawal Al-Maghafi, picks up the story.
Princess Latifa, daughter of one of the most powerful men in the Middle East, Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, ruler of Dubai.
Here she is skydiving. It looks like the perfect life, but it's not one that she wanted anymore. She says that she's a princess held captive. She filmed this video in 2018 as she was about to flee.
I'm feeling positive about the future. Just waking up in the morning and thinking, I can do whatever I want today. I can go wherever I want.
With the help of her friend Tina, they managed to flee Dubai and board a yacht. The plan was to cross the Indian Ocean and seek political asylum in the United States. But 8 days later, as they were about to reach India, her pursuit for freedom was shattered.
We started hearing noises from the upper deck, which sounded like gunshots. Basically, the boat was taken over by Indian special forces. Latif was saying, oh my God, they're here. She continued screaming and kicking and trying to get away, and that's the last time I've seen my friend. So.
Princess Latifa was taken off the boat by force in international waters. She disappeared. Princess Latifa would only be allowed to step out of the villa for this: a lunch with former UN Human Rights Commissioner Mary Robinson, arranged by her stepmother, Princess Haya. Nothing's been heard from her since, until now.
So I'm repeating to them, my name is Latifa Al Maktoum. I don't want to go to Dubai, I want to get asylum.
Panorama has obtained these videos recorded over a period of many months.
In them, she details where she's being held: a villa in central Dubai.
I'm a hostage and this villa has been converted into a jail. All the windows are barred shut, I can't open any window. I've been by myself, solitary confinement, no access to medical help, no trial, no charge, nothing.
She sketched what she can see. The villa is being guarded by around 30 police on rotation. Panorama has independently verified the details of where and how she's being imprisoned.
Nobody should be subjected to that. Solitary confinement of that sort is broadly considered to be a form of torture as it becomes prolonged the way this has been right now.
For 3 years now, life for Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum has continued as normal.
Here's Sheikh Mohammed speaking with Her Majesty the Queen.
but he's been responsible for the imprisonment and abuse of his own daughter. Until this day, the Sheikh maintains that Princess Latifa's return to Dubai was a rescue mission.
I don't want to be a hostage in this jail villa. I just want to be free.
A few months ago, her secret phone went silent. These messages would be the last we'd hear from her.
We've taken the decision to release some of this evidence. We haven't taken this decision lightly. I feel that she would want us to fight for her and not give up.
Every day I am worried about my safety and my life. Don't really know if I'm going to survive the situation. The police threatened me that I'll be in prison my whole life and I'll never see the sun again.
That was Princess Latifa ending that report by our correspondent Nawal Al-Maghafi. And as we mentioned, the Sheikh found himself criticised by the High Court in London last year when his daughter's circumstances were being considered. The Sheikh is one of the richest heads of state in the world and a somewhat controversial figure, but he's also an extremely well-connected figure, not least because of his business interests, including his horse racing empire, which has brought him into contact with the Queen on several occasions. Our diplomatic correspondent, James Landell, considers the potential impact of the BBC Panorama investigation.
Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum might be Prime Minister of the United Arab Emirates and one of the richest heads of state in the world. But he's also one of the biggest landowners in Britain, who shares a passion for horses with the Queen and whose stables are a mainstay of the British racing industry. His wealth flows through Britain. He owns passenger ferries, the London Gateway Port and vast estates in Scotland, Surrey and here in Suffolk, where he keeps hundreds of horses. But the Sheikh is also a man who, according to a High Court judge, not only intimidated his then wife, Princess Haya, seen here, but also imprisoned his daughter, something Latifa has now confirmed herself.
World leaders now need to look at who they are calling friends and doing business with and distance themselves from Sheikh Mohammed until he abides by not only his own laws, but international law.
Such is the family's influence that in 2018 it persuaded a former president of Ireland and ex-UN Human Rights Commissioner to meet the princess in Dubai. Mary Robinson was supposedly there to prove Latifa was alive but unwell. She now admits she was tricked and wants an investigation.
I was misled initially by my good friend, Princess Haya, because she was misled. Haya began to explain that Latifa had quite a serious bipolar problem. And they were saying to me, very kind of, in a way that was very convincing, we don't want Latifa to go through any further trauma. I didn't know how to address somebody who was bipolar about their trauma, but I really didn't actually want to talk to her and increase the trauma over a nice lunch.
The question is what impact these revelations might have, if any, on Sheikh Mohammed. Buckingham Palace would not comment on his relationship with the Queen, and some doubted the British government would intervene.
Is it Britain getting involved to make Britain feel better, or is it Britain getting involved because it actually might create a change of heart and lead to the freedom of this particular young woman? Now, people have to be pretty candid about these things. It's not going to work.
The United Nations has in the past asked Sheikh Mohammed's ministers for news about Princess Latifa, but to no avail. In the end, his daughter's fate seems to lie in his hands, and his alone. James Landell, BBC News.
And just to let you know, you can see the full version of the Panorama investigation. It's called The Missing Princess, and it is on the BBC iPlayer. Let's move on to the day's other main news. The number of people in England being asked to shield to protect themselves from coronavirus is to be expanded. The government is recommending an extra 1.7 million people to be added to the 2.3 million already on the list. Half the group have not yet been vaccinated, so they'll now be prioritised by their local GPs. And the change has been prompted by a new kind of calculation, taking a bigger combination of risk factors into account, as our health editor Hugh Pym explains.
The least well-off areas have been hit hard by COVID. Health officials are taking that into account with new modelling to predict who's most at risk. Obesity, gender and ethnic background are other factors being used to identify people who'll be advised to shield. The existing shielding list was compiled based on those with serious health conditions. The advice is to stay at home and support will be offered.
All of these new individuals who are included will be able to take that advice if they want to. They would also be able to get access to prioritised supermarket deliveries, to medicines delivery. And also, if they're unable to work from home and they choose to take the advice and stay at home, they will be able to access statutory sick pay.
Currently, the shielding list in England includes about 2.3 million people. Under the new policy, about 1.7 million more will be contacted and added to the list. Of those, about 820,000 haven't yet had a vaccination. Officials say they'll now be prioritised.
To protect them.
Some have questioned the timing when the COVID risk factors had been identified a while ago.
It would have been better to protect people at the earliest possible opportunity, especially when we knew the additional risk placed upon people who came from certain ethnic minority backgrounds living in areas of deprivation. But now that we have got this tool, it's vital that people are supported to protect themselves.
Letters from the NHS will start going out to the new names on the shielding list. Local councils will contact them offering support. But for some with areas of high deprivation, that'll be a major undertaking.
Already we've got 17,000 people who are shielding. And the news today means that over the next 2 weeks, we're going to be shielding another 12,000 people who are over 70 and another 12,000 who are under 70. That, I think, shows in very graphic terms the health inequalities which exist in a borough like Brent.
Shielding will continue in England till the end of March. Officials in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland have access to the modelling, but none are currently planning to expand their lists of those being advised to shield. Hugh Pym, BBC News.
The BBC Radio 2 presenter Jo Whiley says she is living a nightmare after her sister, who has diabetes and learning disabilities, tested positive for coronavirus after an outbreak at her care home. Jo has revealed that she has been offered a vaccine before her younger sister, Frances, was 53, possibly, she thinks, because she is deemed to be a carer. And she said she wanted to speak up for the people who have been overlooked. She's been talking to our Disability Affairs correspondent, Nikki Fox.
She's my younger sister. She's got red hair and she's got the flaming temper that goes with it. She gives really good hugs. She forms very, very close attachments with people.
Jo's sister Frances lives in supported living alongside other people with learning disabilities. She's still not had her vaccine, but Jo's been offered hers.
It doesn't make complete sense to me why I would get the vaccine and my sister, who has got learning disabilities, who has diabetes and is vulnerable, would not get the vaccine.
Jo, what measures have you and your family gone to try and get Frances the vaccine?
For weeks now, we have done everything we possibly can. I cannot tell you. I've sent emails, my mum has sent emails, the care home sent emails. In the end, you just give up. You know, that's what we had to do.
After weeks of concern, today Jo found out that Frances has tested positive for coronavirus.
Please, 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 can nothing happen to her? Can she be okay? Can she be one of the lucky ones who gets through this without being seriously ill? The thought of her having to go to hospital without my mum by her side and Frances being terrified and confused and having to go through something like this on her own it's just not something I can let myself think about, to be honest.
It's a fear many people with learning disabilities have, especially during the pandemic.
It is important that they do get vaccinated to help to protect them and save them from having to maybe go into hospital where they will get stressed out, and if they can't have people with them who understand them.
Of course, some people with learning disabilities in certain areas are getting the vaccine. How do you feel that Frances hasn't got hers yet?
I've got a vaccine coming to me sometime this week, and my sister, who has now tested positive, is not going to be able to have a vaccine for a really long time. It just feels so unfair.
With millions of people having had the vaccine now, Jo wants to use her voice to speak for her sister and the many others she feels have simply been forgotten. Nikki Fox, BBC News.
Now, children aged between 6 and 17 have started taking part in trials for the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. Some 300 children are taking part in the entire study to find out if the vaccine is safe and effective for young people. Currently, it's only authorised for those over 18. From Oxford, our medical editor Fergus Walsh sent this report.
This is a half-term with a difference, an unusual break from homeschooling.
And so do we know that after people have their vaccination, sometimes they can get some red...
Tilda is 16 and didn't hesitate about signing up for the vaccine trial.
Well, we live relatively nearby, so when I saw that it was going on here, I thought, you know, if I can do my bit to help, then why not?
And no problem with the needles or the blood tests?
I'm all right with needles, yeah, I don't really mind.
The study will test how children and teenagers respond to a vaccine currently being used to protect people their grandparents' age. They'll get 2 doses of the Oxford jab or a meningitis vaccine as a control for comparison. Like the other volunteers, Ella, who's 14, wants to do her bit.
To further the research and hopefully help and make sure that us kids can be safe and get the vaccine rolled out.
It made for some very proud parents.
I think she's amazing. I saw the call for children volunteers and I went and spoke to her, explained what the vaccine was about, and she volunteered without a hesitation.
Children are highly unlikely to be seriously affected by COVID, although a small minority are at increased risk. They generally get few or no symptoms at all. Immunising them might help reduce the spread of coronavirus.
Well, it may be rather similar to the flu situation, where with the influenza programme we vaccinate children both to protect them, but also because that reduces transmission in the wider population to ensure that all of us are protected against the virus.
All 3 COVID vaccines approved in the UK are being tested in children. Pfizer and Moderna are doing their studies in the US. If the trials go well, it's highly likely that all school-aged children will eventually be offered COVID jabs. Trials in even younger children below school age could follow, but are some way off. The results of this study should be known by the summer, by which time all these volunteers' parents and older relatives should themselves have been offered a COVID jab. Fergus Walsh, BBC News, Oxford.
Time to take a look at the latest official figures. There were 10,625 new infections recorded in the latest 24-hour period. An average of 12,332 new cases were recorded per day in the past week. That's back to levels not seen since the first few days of October. 21,000 people are in hospital with coronavirus across the UK. In the last 24 hours, 799 deaths have been recorded. That's people who died within 28 days of a positive COVID test, and that's down almost 25% since this time last week. On average, 621 deaths were announced every day in the last week, and the total number of people who've died in this pandemic so far is 118,195. And to talk about the vaccinations, almost 276,000 people have had their first dose of one of the approved COVID vaccines in the latest 24-hour period. It means that more than 15.5 million people have now had their first jab. And with me to look at the day's events is our health editor, Hugh Pym. We talked earlier about a change in the shielding policy. Tell us more about that.
Yes, Hugh, it's a very big exercise in England. 1.7 million people, as we've heard, being added to the shielding list. There's a big logistical exercise, getting all the letters out. Then council officials will have to follow up to each household to offer support. And remember, we're talking about maybe people in low-income families with insecure employment who will need some convincing that they can stay at home and shield. They'll need to be persuaded that there is support out there to actually go ahead and do it, and then adding 800,000 just over to the vaccination list priorities and actually getting them vaccinated quickly with all the other jabs that need to take place. And some might well be saying, Why was this not introduced before, given the known risk factors, including age and obesity and ethnic background? Why has it not happened before? Nevertheless, it's been widely welcomed by different groups, and health officials in England are making clear that this is a very sophisticated piece of modelling. They had to get it right, get all the technicalities in place before they could roll it out. That's why it hadn't happened before. Now, shielding in England will continue till the end of March. The hope will be, of course, that case numbers have come down and the risk level is a bit lower and restrictions may be being eased. But a reminder of the threat still out there, and ministers have highlighted this, new variants developing and increasing. And with the South African variant, surge testing began in certain communities a couple of weeks ago to try to nip that in the bud. And tonight, surge testing additional resources are being put into Norfolk, Southampton and Woking and some areas of Manchester, again, to try to keep tabs on this South African variant.
Hugh, thanks for the update. Hugh Pym there, our health editor. Now, the latest charges brought by the ruling military in Myanmar against the former leader Aung San Suu Kyi are fabricated, according to Boris Johnson, who said that her continued detention was a clear violation of her human rights. Ms Suu Kyi, who appeared in court on video link today, is alleged to have violated the country's natural disaster law, in addition to earlier charges on possessing illegal communications equipment. Protests against the military coup have continued across Myanmar, but a military spokesman claimed that Ms Suu Kyi was being confined for her own safety. Our Southeast Asia correspondent Jonathan Head has the story.
When you've lost the monks in Myanmar, you're in trouble. They led the last big uprising against military rule. Now some are joining the protests against the coup. It's the diversity and inventiveness of this civil disobedience movement which has stumped Myanmar's new military rulers. This impromptu painting shows a young woman who was shot in the head by police last week. The involvement of so many professional groups is also challenging the authorities. These are engineers refusing to cooperate with the new regime. Here, people joined railway workers to ensure that the trains don't run on time under military rule. Public services are beginning to crumble under the strain. Banks are running out of cash. Putting troops on the streets is no answer to this kind of protest. So, 2 weeks after seizing power, the military offered their own version of events to journalists today, accusing protesters of violence and intimidation, and insisting their power grab was not, in fact, a coup. But this was also the day the generals put Aung San Suu Kyi on trial, on what looked like trumped-up and trivial charges. After that, any battle for hearts and minds was already lost. Even for the nameless and mainly younger organisers of this movement, she is still the popularly elected leader of the country. Jonathan Head, BBC News.
The First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, has confirmed that some pupils will be allowed back to school from next Monday. Children in early learning and the first 3 years of primary school will be among those going back, as is the case in Wales. Our Scotland editor, Sarah Smith, is in Glasgow. Sarah, how fast is this process likely to progress?
Well, we have, as you say, some of the youngest pupils going back to school on Monday, along with some older students who need help with practical subjects. But that doesn't mean that other lockdown restrictions are likely to be lifted in Scotland. In fact, quite the opposite. Nicola Sturgeon made very clear that in order to create the room to allow a certain degree of a return to education, other restrictions will need to stay in place. And she warned specifically that just because some kids are going back to school, people should not be treating this as a return to greater normality. Parents shouldn't be socialising at the school gates. People shouldn't be going back into their workplaces just because they don't have to do homeschooling anymore. And actually, we will get a framework from the Scottish Government next week that will lay out how Scotland might be able to exit lockdown. But that's very unlikely to contain any specific dates. Instead, what it will do is lay out the conditions that will need to be met before any further restrictions can be lifted. In the meantime, we've all been warned not to book any Easter holidays. The First Minister says that by the time the summer comes around, staycations might be possible, but she's still advising people not to book any trips abroad. And if you remember the first lockdown, the Scottish Government's approach was very slow, gradual and cautious when it came to lifting restrictions. Often, restrictions were lifted several weeks in Scotland after they already had been in England. And it looks as though we're going to exit lockdown this time in very much the same way, with a very slow and cautious approach, because Nicola Sturgeon says the situation, despite the vaccination programme, is still very fragile, and it's clear she doesn't want to take any risks with this.
Sarah, many thanks again. Sarah Smith with the latest for us there in Glasgow. The head of Arconic, that's the company that made the cladding panels used at Grenfell Tower in West London, has told the public inquiry that he only learnt about a key British fire safety standard after the disaster. Across the UK, including Grenfell, cladding suppliers believed that a product could be used on tall buildings if it met a British standard. But the inquiry heard that the required test had not been carried out and the product had failed some European fire safety tests. 4 passengers at Birmingham Airport have been fined £10,000 each for failing to declare that they travelled to the UK from a COVID high-risk country. Since yesterday, travellers arriving in England from 33 countries have been required to spend 10 days in quarantine in government-approved hotels. In Scotland, arrivals from all international destinations are required to quarantine. Now, over the past year, we've become very familiar with reports from hospitals showing the immense pressure on those staff dealing with the pandemic. Rather less attention has been given to the teams working flat out to provide other life-saving services in hospitals where so many resources have been redirected. At Ysbyty Glan-Clwyd, a hospital in North East Wales, our correspondent Jeremy Cook has been talking to staff providing the more traditional range of urgent medical care, often in challenging circumstances.
In a time of COVID, time to breathe.
We've been going 100 miles an hour in the department, in resus, trauma calls.
Precious moments in the North Wales Hills for Dr Sam Wright.
This is where I come to reset before I'm ready for my next shift and just hear something other than machines beeping at me.
And so, back to work.
20 milligrams diazepam, yeah?
2, 3. Have you taken any painkillers yourself today?
It's a fairly small district general hospital and there is a massive sense of community.
I'm one of the A&E team.
In the hospital's red zones, the COVID zones, specialist teams are fighting to save lives.
We'll keep checking.
But this is the story of the doctors, nurses, support staff in the green zone.
You've got a bit of a lump on there, is that quite tender?
No COVID here, but so many patients who need help.
We're getting quite a significant rise in mental health problems, patients coming in having taken overdoses or self-harming as a result of the pressures that they're under and the struggles that they're having at the moment. When was the last time you had the chest pain?
Maybe 10 days or so.
OK.
Colin has just arrived at A&E.
The ECG has shown something.
So it's a heart attack. It's suggesting that some parts of the heart have been struggling to get enough blood.
Fear of COVID means too many patients.
Will I be staying in tonight?
You will.
Are waiting too long to get help.
We've seen patients who have had heart attacks in the preceding days or weeks but not wanted to bother us, patients who have got quite significant and quite progressed cancer, and unfortunately that starts to limit how much we can actually do for their ongoing condition.
Across the hospital, COVID means delays. But the life-saving work must go on. Jill's in for breast cancer surgery, so no visitors.
Nervous, apprehensive, but determined to get it over and done with and start my life off again.
Jill's operation was cancelled at another hospital because of a COVID spike. So massive relief, it's happening here. High-end care from surgeon Mandana Pennick, but she and her team are under pressure.
We've had staff off shielding, we've got staff off sick. I have seen some evidence of burnout, especially within the nursing staff, and I just don't know how much longer we can keep it up.
So I've got 2 Greens beds, so down to 1 now.
Delays mean when the pandemic ends, so much hard work will begin.
will be a mountain to climb, both in terms of the operational challenge of getting the right care to all those people that have been waiting all this time. But also, I think what we will find is that clinical teams come across patients who have suffered because they've had to wait longer.
Emma's not expecting the cavalry to come to the rescue. So tackling the backlog will need innovation.
I've done one biopsy now.
Professor Kingsley Akwame is using a new technique for prostate cancer diagnosis.
Any sharp pain, you let me know.
No longer the need for a precious operating theatre. It can now be done here.
All done.
And Nurse Jo is training to do the job.
Gosh, yeah, they've been waiting so long, some of these patients, but if we can just help to reduce that backlog, it's rewarding. Every week we're seeing differences.
Helping patients, it's the mission statement here, not just for COVID, but for everyone.
Is this him here?
Yeah, that's it.
A day after surgery, Jill is heading home, back to her own bed.
I'd recommend it to anybody. Get your appointments, get your things done at the hospitals. Been fantastic here. I'm very, very lucky.
Back on the hills for Sam, there's time to reflect.
I've seen some phenomenal acts of kindness. There's definitely a desire to get through this all together.
Together, in a medical landscape utterly transformed by COVID-19. Jeremy Cook, BBC News, North Wales.
Various pressures on staff at Ysbyty Glan Clwyd. That was Jeremy Cook reporting there. Let's have some football news then. And Liverpool were in action this evening against RB Leipzig in the Champions League, and the Reds cruised to a 2-0 victory, putting their recent poor domestic form behind them. Nesta McGregor watched the action.
Sometimes when your domestic form is a little below par, all that's needed is a little European getaway. Liverpool had tickets for Germany, but COVID meant they were rerouted to Budapest. Leipzig came closest to opening the scoring, denied only by the post.
And that's it. Now BBC One, it's time for the news where you are. Have a good night.